Good morning, everybody. Hope your day is off to a good start. And I want to talk a little bit more about the Seahawks' first two draft picks in the most recent NFL draft. Want to talk a little bit more about Devon Witherspoon and JSN because I want to make my position on those selections very, very clear here because I can understand that there might be a little bit of confusion about where I sit here because both players, both Devon Witherspoon and JSN, were players that I did not have nearly as high on my big board as they ended up getting selected. I had Devon Witherspoon at like 17, we picked him at 5, and then I had JSN right around the 30s, and we picked him at 20. So a lot of people could look at that and go, well, I was obviously really unhappy with those picks. But generally speaking, I've been pretty good with those picks since we made them, and I want to explain where I'm coming from and specifically what needs to happen to make those picks truly successful. And I also want to elaborate on why, while I liked the picks, I'm not yet at the point where I can say that I love the picks. I want to explain where that comes from and why I feel that way. And I want to talk about what it's going to take to make those picks work to their maximum ability. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they're two first-round selections. You had two picks in the top 20. You're going to want to do something to maximize what you get out of those picks, or else why did you make them? So I want to take a look at two things from last season and understand that in both cases I'm working with incomplete data here because the complete set of data, I don't have it. I'm working with a pretty, I would say, comprehensive and pretty definitive and at the very least meaningful set of data here, but I don't have all the data as of right now. If I ever get all the data, sometime this offseason I probably will, I might talk more about this. But working with what we have, I want to talk about why I did not have those guys very high on my big board and why I ultimately believe that as long as the team changes a couple of tendencies in 2023, the picks are good. And the picks have a chance to be great. I just want to see it. I think they're going to do it. I think it makes all the sense in the world for them to do it. It would be weird if they didn't do it because they're the ones who use the picks on these players. But I want to see them do it before I fully embrace these picks. And I'll say this, if we don't do these things, then those picks are going to become not so great, and we'll be disappointed by them. So the first thing I want to look at here is from PFF. This is from after week 12 of the NFL. This is after we played the Raiders, I believe. So it's exactly 2/3 of the way through the season. PFF was writing this coverage update article every week for a while there, and then after week 12, they just stopped. I don't know why, but I can't find anything after week 12 in this coverage update format. But what they did is they took the percentage of the time each NFL defense played man coverage in each week. So this is a really good resource. This is a great way to look at a chart to get an idea of which teams are running the most man coverage and which teams therefore are running the most zone coverage. So you can see that the team that is running man coverage the most by a pretty decent margin is the New York Giants. And then you have a team like the New England Patriots, distant second. There's only one team that runs man coverage more than half the time as of week 12. By the end of the season, that may have changed a little bit, but again, I don't have the full set of data, and this set of data is still pretty good. But the first thing you learn from this chart is that even the teams that run the most man coverage run a lot of zone coverage. So even if the Seahawks become one of the teams that runs man coverage the most, they're still probably going to run zone more than half the time. No team is running man coverage a vast majority of the time, or even more than a tiny majority of the time. So understand that just because we sit here and talk about the Seahawks needing to adjust their defense to run more man doesn't mean they abandon zone at all. In fact, they will still probably run zone more than man. They could run zone more than man and still be the second most man-happy coverage unit in the NFL. So the reason why I say all that is you scroll all the way down to the bottom of this list. Let's zoom in here just to get a really good idea of what we're talking about here. The Seahawks run man defense less than all but two teams, the Vikings and the Rams. The Seahawks are in zone over 83% of the time in 2022 as of week number 12. So that number may have changed slightly. In fact, I suspect it went up slightly over the last 6 weeks of the season, but probably not by that much. I would be surprised if it was above 20% still. And only 2 teams run man coverage less, the Vikings and the Rams. So here's the linchpin of the Devon Witherspoon pick right here. This is really what I'm looking at. Devon Witherspoon is a man corner. He excelled in man coverage in 2022 for the Illinois Fighting Illini, and his skill set lends itself better to man than zone. I don't think he's bad in zone at all. I don't. But I do believe he's better in man. Tariq Woolen, honestly, probably better in man than zone. So put it together. What does this mean? It means the Seahawks have 2 excellent man corners starting for them. 2 guys who I believe will benefit tremendously from getting to play man coverage over zone coverage. And to a certain extent, I think you can see a little bit of an evidence track that the Seahawks started to realize what they had with Woolen as the year went on. I mean, you look at the first couple of games here, you can see that they had 2 games where they basically didn't run man at all. Like literally a couple of snaps over the course of a couple of games here. And then they started to turn it up a little bit. Then it waned back down. Then it went back up in this Raiders game. It is matchup oriented, of course. Like when we played the Lions and Saints, we played man coverage a lot. Probably because we saw something in those matchups that we didn't like having to go into with zone coverage. We felt like man would serve us better in those games. Of course, I guess that didn't really work out because of the way the defense played in those 2 games. But regardless, I think you can see that there might have been a little bit of acknowledgement that this team would be better served to play a little more man, but not significantly. Not by enough to really move the needle here. So, if the Seahawks want to get the most out of Devon Witherspoon, and honestly, I would say Tariq Woolen as well, you don't have to stop running zone, but I want to see more man. I want to be one of the most man-happy teams in the league. I want to run man maybe 40% of the time this year, which is something that we've never really done with Carroll, but we've never had corners like this before. I mean, Witherspoon, I know he didn't run the fastest 40 time. It was like 4.42, but understand that Devon Witherspoon was also playing through running through a hamstring injury. He's probably a 4.3 something guy. And we all know how fast Tariq is. So we have 2 lightning fast cornerbacks starting on the outside who can man up. Utilize it. Take advantage of it. Let them man up. They're going to get beat every now and then. Live with the results. And it frees up the rest of the defense to do so many other cool things that I know that deep down Carroll wants this defense to be able to do. So, this chart tells a pretty compelling story here. You don't have to abandon your zone defense. Not at all. You just have to be running it about 40-45% of the time, and you're one of the league leaders, and you're taking full advantage of the assets that you have. You have an all-pro caliber corner, and you have a corner you took number 5 overall. And if the team embraces this reality and decides they're going to be running a lot of man coverage in 2023, switching things up, that Devon Witherspoon pick, which I would not have been very high on if I thought we were going to be running a lot of zone, can become a great pick. Now let's do the same thing with our other first-round pick, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And this is another area where in order to get the best out of the player, you're going to have to change your tendencies from the previous year. You're going to have to do things a little bit differently, because if you continue to do the same things that you were doing, you're not going to get that much out of the player, and it's going to become a pick where you didn't get proper value, and it has nothing to do with the player. It has everything to do with the way in which you're using him. I'm talking about personnel groupings. I'm talking about formations. I'm talking about what players you get on the field and how often you get them on the field. So what we have here on this website, this is NFLEloApp.com, is personnel groupings that teams utilized on first down. Now, I don't have the data yet for every down. That'll be made available sometime this offseason probably, and maybe I'll talk about it further then. But this is just on first down. However, I don't think this is a bad thing, Because while we have less data to work with because it's only first down is also the most neutral down in football. Like, I think we all understand that when you're in, say, a 3rd and 13 versus a 4th and inches versus a 2nd and 23 versus a 2nd and 1, your personnel groupings are going to be dictated by that situation. But first down is almost always going to be 1st and 10. Yeah, sometimes it's 1st and 5, 1st and 15, 1st and 20. That does happen, of course. But most of the time, first down is 1st and 10 and the situation is neutral. So you can get a really good idea of what a team wants to do in a neutral situation by just looking at first down personnel groupings. Obviously, not all first downs are made equal. You can have 1st and goal at the 2. You can have 1st and 10 at your own 2. You can have 1st and 10 at the 50. Those are all very different, and your personnel groupings might change because of the circumstances. But for the most part, first down is relatively neutral. So this is not a bad way to get an idea of what teams like to do when everything is neutral. And what we have here are personnel groupings labeled by number. And just to refresh everybody here, 11 personnel is 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 receivers. 12 personnel is 1 back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. 13 personnel is 1 back, 3 tight ends, 1 receiver. 21 is 2 backs, 1 tight end, 2 receivers. And 22 is 2 tight ends, 2 backs, and 1 receiver. So you might notice the only formation I mentioned there where we use 3 receivers is 11 personnel. So that's what we're going to focus on here. How often did teams run 11 personnel on first down? You can see that some teams are way at the top, and then some teams like the Seahawks are pretty close to the bottom here. In 2022, the Seahawks ran 11 personnel, aka 3 receiver sets, 41% of the time. Only 5 teams did it less. Only 5 teams ran 3 receiver sets less than the Seahawks last year. Now, this makes some sense, right? We had 2 awesome receivers on the outside for 2022, Metcalf and Lockett, and then there was a big drop-off. Marquise Goodwin was good, but he got hurt a couple of times. He missed some games, and he's still not the kind of player you want to be putting out there for 80, 85, 90% of your snaps. He's just a nice player to have around. Meanwhile, we really liked what we were doing with our tight ends. So 40% of the time, which was most in the league on first down, we ran 12 personnel. So we would have 2 tight ends on the field more than any team in the league. And we also ran 13 personnel, which is 3 tight ends, more than every team except the Tennessee Titans. So we really like to use our tight ends, and when you really like to use your tight ends, that means you don't like to use your receivers as much. We were one of the least receiver-happy teams in the league. Now, when is Jackson Smith going to get on the field? He's going to get on the field when there are 3 receivers because he's a slot guy. That is by far where he is the best. So if you want to get Jackson Smith on the field, a vast majority of the time, it's going to be in 3 receiver sets, or more receiver sets, I guess. But that's in the other category, which you can see most teams barely use. The Seahawks used it less than 1% of the time. So that's not even really a factor here. But if the Seahawks continue to use their same personnel groupings from 2022 in 2023, Jackson Smith might not get on the field even half the plays. And the reason why I'm not too concerned about this is, number one, you drafted him and you had to know what he was when you drafted him. But more than that, remember, our offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, comes from the Rams coaching tree, and the Rams use 3 receiver sets more than anyone else by far. I'm sure he has a desire to do it, but he looked at our personnel last year and was like, I'd rather do big tight end stuff than big receiver stuff because that's what we have, and that's what I feel more comfortable doing. So now that he has a JSN, who I think immediately becomes one of the better slot receivers in the league, I think that it makes a lot of sense that now we would be utilizing those 3 receiver sets more. But I need to see it first. I'm not going to just 100% assume it's going to happen because it makes sense in my head. I need to actually see it. So that is why, in terms of value, I wasn't super high on either pick. But that is also why I believe that if this team can adjust their tendencies from last year, they can get a ton out of these picks and make them to be excellent first-round selections. All right, so that kind of fills everything in. Thanks for watching. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think down below.